The Garvellachs, or Islands of the Sea, are a group of small uninhabited islands in the middle of the entrance to the Firth of Lorn. They are a remote, bleak, unwelcoming sight on a dour day. However, during good weather they are well worthy of a visit, as they hold a fascinating history to days gone by. This video hopefully shows why. Thursday, 17th September 2020, and my adventure starts at Kelly's Pier in Loch Etive, an early morning high tide. I pass through the Falls of Laura and then into the Firth of Lorn, passing Carrera before going through the Sound of Inch. Rounding Fladda, I then head down the Sound of Ling before passing through the Grey Dogs and onwards to the Garvellachs. The forecast was for a couple of days of light winds with temperatures reaching the 20s, a real September Indian summer. As such, I intended making the most of things, so took my camping gear for an overnight stay. Unfortunately, due to other commitments, I couldn't extend it into a longer adventure. I was as happy as a sandboy heading down lovely Loch Etive towards the Connell Bridge in the Falls of Laura. And although it was almost spring tides, it was slack water under the bridge and the falls were barely noticeable. On entering the Firth of Lorn, I was delighted to see the sea was as smooth and as flat as the Falls of Laura. Although my plan was to land in the Garvellach Islands, I was in no hurry and had no fixed route to get there. I was just enjoying the moment, knowing that there was not many such nice days left in the boating season. As the Garvellachs are in such an exposed situation, I was delighted the weather would allow me to land on them. The island of Mull bathed in the horizon in the low early morning sun. I altered course slightly to pass behind the Mull ferry, as it travels faster than you may think. Because the sun was still low, the island of Carrera looked a shadow of its normal self. Ahead of me, Back Island off the southern tip of Carrera reminded me of a surface submarine, and I headed for the gap between both islands. I then set course for Inch Island, which lies off the coast of Seal Island, and it was a pure pleasure to be skimming across such a smooth sea surface. Passing Easdale, I could now see the Garvellach Islands in the distance to the right, with the higher hills of Scarborough straight ahead. Sliding past the slate island of Belnahua, I knew I was now approaching waters with strong tidal flows, influenced by the Sound of Jura. Tidal flows with names like the Corryvreckan, the Doris Moor and the Grey Dogs all originate in the waters of the Sound, squeezing through narrow gaps between the many islands. It's not an area for a small boat on a windy day, but on a day like this it was just perfect. I had a good gawk at the lighthouse and its walled garden on the island of Fladda, Flada meaning flat island. Out to sea I could now clearly see the Garvellach Islands, but as I was in no hurry I headed for the Sound of Lyng first. The flat sea showed little signs of strong tidal flows, indicating that it was not that far from slack water, so I planned to go through the Grey Dogs. The Grey Dogs is a tidal flow in the narrow gap between the islands of Scarba and Lunga. In full flow it often has standing waves on a fast-flowing flood tide. However, I didn't expect to see any at this time. In fact, the often angry grey dogs were more like sleeping hush puppies as I passed through the gap. Passing Lunga on my right hand side and Scarba on my left hand side. I was now heading directly to Eileach and Naoimh, Island of the Saints, which is the most southerly of the Garvellach Islands. A freshening easterly wind caused the sea to swell a little, and I was a bit concerned it would make landing difficult if waves were washing onto the rocks where I intended to land. However, I needn't have worried because once through the outer reefs the water was still sheltered. A yacht was at anchor in the bay, and its tender had landed in the narrow shore, blocking access for me beaching there. Besides, I needed to find somewhere to land that wouldn't leave my boat high and dry in the falling tide. I found the perfect spot above a thick bed of kelp. I was glad I was wearing my dry suit, because when I lowered myself off the boat, the water came up to my chest. This gave plenty of time to explore and not worry about being left high and dry. And I wanted plenty of time to see why it's called the Island of the Saints. It's because it's believed that in 542 AD, St Brendan of Ireland came here to build his monastery. Although I'm not a religious person, I confess I do find a fascinating sense of inner peace when I visit such places. At the northern end of this ancient religious site, which is now looked after by Historic Scotland, are the Beehive Cells where the monks of old lived and prayed in. As I wandered around, I found it hard to believe that they stood the test of time so well, but perhaps it's because they are so remote that the hands of man have left them alone. In the centre of the site are the remains of St Brendan's monastery, and propped against the wall in one of the corners is an ancient gravestone, similar to those found in Iona and other early Christian sites. Near the monastery is a small underground chamber, which may have been for storing food to keep it cool, or perhaps another small prayer room. It was flooded with water on my visit, so I couldn't go into it. There is also the remains of a 19th century cottage which belonged to the last inhabitants of the islands, but it's got nothing to do with St Brendan. I crossed a small burial ground before clambering up a little hill to get an overhead view of this sacred place. On this little hilltop was another couple of stones, one marked with a cross. This is believed to be Ethne's grave, and she was St. Columba's mother. I sat beside her for a while, listening to the silence of the islands and admiring the views. Yep, without doubt, Eileach and Naoimh is a very special and saintly place indeed. With the patience of a saint, I slowly made my way back down the hill, past the remains of what was believed to be the base of a large stone cross, then made my way back to the boat, and I was delighted to see it still afloat on its soft bed of kelp. I clambered aboard and navigated the outer reefs before rounding the very southern tip of the Garvellachs. It was still early afternoon, and looking for something else to do, I pointed the bow of the boat towards Malcolm's Point in Mull, 10 miles away across the sea. Not that that bothered me, as my impulse told me that's where I now wanted to be, which brings me to the end of part 1 of this box set, so do come back and see some more of Mull, and where I set up camp for the night. Thanks for watching.